I will try in a few minutes. It's a bit ambitious of me to try and say three different things. One is what I think is the reality of Syria in terms of its both regime and opposition. In what state are we? What is the health of institutions, social groups, civil society, all sorts of institutions in the country, inside and outside, opposition or regime. I think we are first in face of an opposition that you have seen and described and analyzed because it is very visible to all. Any argument between two members of the opposition gets into the media immediately, so you know that this is a fractious, not cohesive, full of contradictions and weaknesses, and not institutionalized by any means. I agree with that fully. It has not been able yet to structure itself into a functioning coalition and institution. On the ground, on the opposition side, you also have the same type of phenomenon of extreme fragmentation, and I would say even atomization, because they're really small units, and those who have survived as the authentic, local, authentic opposition groups with no ideological agenda are the ones at the very local level. I was referring earlier in the morning to the community-based organizations as functioning. It is true of military groups as well, armed groups. These are the boys of the town, the sons of a city, of a neighborhood who organized and came together. And these groups are the ones we still find from 2.5 years ago until now. You still find them. As opposed to larger groups who have more of an ideological agenda, much more means at their disposal, much more arms, and therefore are able to dominate the scene. But the real Syrians, the non-ideological, are the local groups, and they get very modest support from informal local networks of their families and the extended neighborhoods of where people live, the community at large. I want to say that this image is not very different from what goes on the side of the regime. What we have is also a regime that has lost to a very large extent its cohesion. When we speak of the regime's institutions, we should distinguish, of course, between perhaps two or three. Either we can distinguish between civil and armed, or between civil, military, and security. If we distinguish between civil and armed, civil institutions, by that I mean government institutions. These institutions, in fact, continue to function. You have administrations that work. You have bureaucracies that still operate. You have people that are extremely corrupt in these institutions, but you always have people who are committed, conscientious, doing their work because they need to keep things going. These administrations continue to exist. There is a capacity to restart using these administrations, but at the head of these institutions, there is no decision maker whatsoever. There's no minister that has any decision-making power. So civil institutions have a capacity, but have no decision-making power. Where power lies, and the ability to control society, territory, and resources, is at the level of the security and the military, who are tied directly to the regime, to the family of Assad, basically. These structures have also lost a lot of their cohesion. Within security forces, you have branches, you have agencies, you have local agencies of a branch with a leader that allows his fighters to go and commit violations, looting, behavior, that sometimes rape, all sorts of misbehavior on the ground, because basically there is no serious and cohesive command system within the security apparatus. In that, I think we have something that resembles very much the armed groups on the opposition side. You have basically militias that are left to act in different regions because the resources are not very available, and therefore they have to go and help themselves, basically, to what they find when they conquer an area and they enter different neighborhoods of the opposition. So the cohesiveness of the regime's security institutions has largely disintegrated over time. And that is an element that is rarely taken into account, because I think it's obviously not presented publicly. It is not something that is shown and is covered by a discourse of cohesion. Where cohesion is provided, I think, is by the allies. And Iran here comes as the major player in terms of providing structuring, command, and organization to groups that are mainly sectarian-based. We have militias of tens of thousands of men who are of Iraqi origin, but also from other communities across the region belonging to the Shia branch of Islam. And these communities come and fight and are organized and paid and structured within these militias. And these represent tens of thousands on the side, alongside the Syrian, properly Syrian militias, also sectarian-based, and alongside the army. I want to take the army to signal one thing as well here. I said civilian administration exists. I think the army still exists as a national army. Although its command is largely involved in committing crimes and violations and responsible for many of the crimes committed on the ground, and these are war crimes and they are serious crimes, the rank and file of the army is part of Syrian society. There still is a feeling of national belonging, of being the national army of Syria. And if you look on those who have defected, they have the same feelings. We belong to this army. At some point, we'll come back together in one way or another. What the command will be, what the structure will be, who decision-making is, we don't know. But there's a body there that is the National Syrian Army. It can come together. Maybe one positive aspect of the fact that we had no splinter in the army as we had in Libya or we had in Yemen is that there is a possibility to put this army back together again. I mention these 2 points to show that there's a space for, or there's a capacity to return to continuity of state institutions in Syria. I also mention this to say that countries of the region who want to find ground for a discussion and a peace plan should look at these, should have this as a objective, the continuity of the Syrian state capacity, and also because I think the moderate opposition is very committed to preserving the state institutions and the capacities of the state. Everyone fears a failed state. Everyone fears chaos. Extremists, we don't fear extremists. We fear the chaos that brings extremists. So what you need to fight is not the extremists, it's the chaos that brings these extremists. And I think it's very different to say we're fighting terror. Well, terror came because of some reason. Terror is a symptom of something. This is a body that is weakened, and the cancer reaches it. The cancer is the jihadis, is the extremists. We all agree on that. So how you re-strengthen this body is what we need to work on. I want to say here that because of the weak institutions on each side, individuals become very important, whether they are from the regime or from the opposition. It is individuals who can make a difference. It's very difficult to say such or such an agency is less involved in violence, crimes, etc. As I said, the opposition, it's obvious that it doesn't have institutions. But that makes the individuals who you can pick from each side absolutely decisive in any possible deal. So we need to look very much at beyond, is it Assad who goes, the regime who goes, what do we keep, it's individuals. Who are we going to involve precisely in this process? Because it's around these people that we can start building something. That cannot happen among Syrians alone. And let us be clear, whoever says it has to be a solution between Syrians is not sincere. The space for Syrians to work together has to be opened by regional and international players. Syrians alone cannot do it. Syrians have the will, have the aspiration, and I'm speaking of moderate Syrians. And when I speak of moderate Syrians, believe me, there isn't much of a difference between those who are on the opposition side and those who are counted as part of the regime loyalists. Apart from those who are fighting, and even among those who are fighting, the resemblance is very strong between the moderate opposition and the people who sit on the regimes, in the regime-controlled areas, if you like. Therefore, we still need a serious commitment, first from regional powers, and then from the international powers. There's not enough traction for the international players to impose something if the regional players are not fully involved. And by this I mean, of course, Iran and Saudi Arabia, because they are on each side of the conflict, but also bringing along the other countries. For these countries, the commitment has to be around something that unites them. What is the one thing that unites them? Integrity of Syrian territory. If that commitment can be made, it's not lip service, it has implications. The implications are that if you are working for the interests of the Syrians at large, I would see that Saudi Arabia and its allies and it's the other countries of the Gulf have to commit to a democratic Syria. And that has to be absolutely clear. And here perhaps international powers, Europeans, can play a role in saying, are we working together to achieve the same thing? We want the same outcome in Syria. What is this outcome? If it's a democratic outcome, then that has implications. Who are we supporting on the ground? Who carries this democratic agenda? And there we have not seen enough coordination between the Gulf countries and the Western countries who have a democratic discourse about Syria, but have not always watched carefully what is happening on the ground. On the Iranian side, we also need the commitment. Are we here to build another sectarian-based political system, or can we have a democratic system in which Iran, as I believe, cannot aspire to have a Shia-dominated or Alawi-dominated political system? A realistic Iran would want a democratic system as secular as possible, in which all communities, and particularly minorities, feel comfortable. And along the democratic project, it's not because it's a beautiful project, it's not because these are Western values, it's because it's the only viable political system for Syria to remain one country. So the integrity of Syria is very much dependent on a democratic project. And if there is a commitment to the integrity of Syria, I think working together to open the space for those forces to come together in Syria is what needs to happen. Whether this is idealistic, I don't believe this is idealistic. I believe it is the direction in which we need to walk, and we need to open that path. As I said this morning, the most horrible scenarios can be built from now until a decade or so, and Syria will be gone. If there is any commitment, because of all sorts of reasons, historic, geopolitical, geostrategic, stability, security, including the security of Europeans with jihadis going to fight in Syria, all of this is linked to, I think, the best option is to put this country back together again, and that needs all the players to come together. Then a Syrian solution between Syrians will become possible along the lines that I'm trying to define, and hope that they can be the principles on which an agreement can start emerging. Thank you.